this part of the pre-trip is the coupling components for Waukesha County Technical College's truck driving program. We're going to start with the connections at the back of the tractor. We got to check to make sure these fittings are tight and the electrical plug is seated properly in its holder and the cover is past the hook that holds it in properly. We're going to check our air and electrical lines, checking to make sure there's no cuts, cracks, or bends in the hoses. We're checking to make sure our hoses and our electrical is not hanging on the catwalk, which could rub as we drive down the road. We're also checking these fittings here where it attaches to the trailer. Our glad hands need to be attached properly, the curved parts need to meet, and they cannot be too loose on the emergency and the service brake line. We're also checking our electric plug to make sure our electric plug is seated and the cover attaches properly over the hook right here to hold it in. We're going to come underneath the truck now, and then we're going to inspect the coupling components under here. First, we're going to start with the apron. Apron is the bottom of the trailer that meets the fifth wheel skid plate. The apron we're going to check to make sure it's not cracked, welded, missing any pieces, or broken. We're also going to check our fifth wheel skid plate to make sure our skid plate is properly greased, it's not cracked or missing any pieces. We're also looking to check to make sure that there's no gap between the top of the fifth wheel skid plate and the apron itself. We're going to check our release arm. Checking our release arm to make sure our release arm is in the proper position, which should be all the way in and in a locked position because we're attached to a trailer. We're going to check our pivot pin right here and make sure it's in place. Make sure the cover that holds it on, nuts and bolts that hold it on are tight. We're going to also check to make sure the metal around the pivot pin is not cracked or missing any pieces. We're going to check our fifth wheel platform, which is right here. All right, this whole unit right here that attaches it to the frame of the tractor. We're checking to make sure there's no cracks, no missing pieces. And we're going to check to make sure our nuts and bolts that hold them on are tight and none are missing. We're going to check our fifth wheel slider locking pins. Okay, this fifth wheel right here can move back and forth. There's slider locking pins that lock it in place to ensure that it doesn't move. We're checking to make sure those slider locking pins are locked in place. This one here you can see. Some of them you cannot. They're on the inside and internal. All right, please just check to make sure those are locked, or mention that you're checking to make sure those are locked. All right. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to get underneath the vehicle and we're going to check our kingpin and our locking jaws. Okay. If we look inside here, we're looking at our kingpin all the way up in there to make sure our kingpin is not cracked, bent, or missing any pieces. We're also checking our locking mechanism that goes around the front of it. We're checking to make sure that's not cracked, bent, or missing any pieces, and that it's securely mounted around the kingpin. All right. Next step is we want to check to make sure that there's enough clearance behind the tractor all the way to the landing gear. The slider locking pins or the slider locking mechanism on the fifth wheel could mean that this tractor gets too close to that landing gear. We want to check to make sure that there's enough clearance between the two. This concludes the pre-trip portion of the video.